On the afternoon of December 15th, 1997, a brand new mother named Luz Cuevas sat on her couch in her little apartment in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, cradling her beautiful 10-day-old baby girl who she had named Delamar Vera. And in the room with Luz and her daughter were some members of Luz's extended family who had come over to meet the baby. And after they were all gone, Luz realized she was totally exhausted, and so Luz decided she would also lie down and try to take a nap herself. But as soon as she closed her eyes, she heard this loud thud sound coming from the second floor. And so Luz jumped up, sprinted upstairs, and as she looked down the hall, she could clearly see there was black smoke billowing out of her daughter's nursery. And then a couple of minutes later, firefighters burst into the door and they literally drag Luz out of the nursery. She hasn't found her daughter. And just a couple of minutes later, they were able to extinguish this blaze. And after they came out of the house again, they tell Luz that unfortunately, her daughter was dead. Fast forward to January 24th, 2004. So 6 years after the fire. And on this day, Luz was invited to a family party. She just goes in the house and kind of finds a spot in the back. And as she's doing that, something catches her attention off to the side. And when she turns to look at it and sees what it is, she immediately just freezes. 3 days later, Luz walked into the office of a local state legislator, reached into her purse, and pulled out a little plastic bag that contained a folded up napkin. And she slid it across the table to the legislator. And so he picked up the bag and stared at it inquisitively as Luz dove into this wild explanation about what was in this bag and why she was here. It would turn out somebody broke into her apartment, went into the nursery, and set the fire on purpose, but not before abducting the baby. And that person was Luz's own family members who had been at her apartment that day celebrating the birth of Delamar Vera. It was Luz's husband's cousin, Carolyn Correa. And in fact, on this same day, before the fire and before the abduction, Carolyn made a point to announce to the whole family that she was pregnant, even though she wasn't. It was just going to be her cover story for why she suddenly had this brand new baby. 6 years later, when Luz was at that family party, well, the thing that caught her attention on the other side of the room was her daughter because of her distinctive dimples. Now, Luz knew she couldn't just suddenly yell out like, "That's my daughter!" So instead, she came up with this plan. She walked up to the girl and very discreetly said, "Hey, honey, I think you got some gum in your hair." And so as she pretended to pull gum out of the child's hair, she carefully plucked a few strands and put them inside of a napkin. And then 3 days later, she brought that hair to the legislator and basically said, "Here's what I think happened. I think she stole my kid. Can you test it for DNA to prove that girl is my daughter?" And the legislator was like, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And lo and behold, that hair would prove that girl at the party was her daughter. She did not die in that fire. Carolyn Correa was sentenced to 9 to 30 years in prison for abduction. In the end, Luz was ultimately reunited with her daughter, Delamar.